Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Freilich. This is our weekly roundup of some of the stories that are making headlines across northern Michigan. And at the table with me this week is Eric Van Dusen. Eric, welcome back. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Bill.
When the table in front of us is covered by legal documents, usually means Eric Van Dusen is in the house.
Yeah.
Eric, you are. Tell us how to describe you, because I've known you kind of as a freelance reporter, but you're a strong advocate for FOIA, and really have probably done, I would think, more research than pretty much anybody, and that includes journalists here in northern Michigan, on the rules and regulations of the Freedom of Information Act. You work for a law firm here in Traverse City as well. Give us your background again for those folks who aren't familiar with you.
Well, like you said, I do work for a law firm, attorney Jesse Williams, and we have a couple other attorneys in there currently that are starting, new attorneys, Frederick Signielsen and Betsy Moss, that have come into our office recently. And it's based in Benzonia now. We moved our office to Benzonia because Jesse Williams and I both live in Benzie County, and it's a lot shorter drive. It's like 3 miles down the road from my house. But as far as the FOIA and the Open Meetings Act, I got involved in it probably in 2000, late 90s, because I was investigating for an attorney at that time lawsuits that have been filed against the county in the past, because he had a federal lawsuit against the sheriff's department. So I got involved because I was interested in what was going on with those lawsuits. Right. Just it piqued my interest, and I got hired to do a little PI work for him to try and demonstrate that there was a pattern and practices element to what was occurring at the sheriff's department with their officers, and looking at different instances where law enforcement officers in our county had assaulted people and things of that similar nature, to show a past practice, which is an element for some of the counts in their federal litigation. So that's where it started, and I submit FOIA requests to the county and the sheriff's department for information such as deposition transcripts of other lawsuits, settlement offers and settlement agreements and things of that nature that were regularly denied, and they just would cite FOIA exemptions that were not applicable to the request, and they can't, if the county settles a lawsuit and there's a document pertaining to it, that's a public record. They're expending public resources on litigation.
Emails, anything like
so that's where I got first involved in FOIA, sending FOIA requests, and then subsequently suing the county and the sheriff and even the prosecutor's office in Benzie County for violations of the Freedom of Information Act. And that kind of went pretty close together with the Open Meetings Act as well, because when settling a lawsuit, the county is going into closed sessions, potentially to discuss pending litigation when they're contemplating settling a lawsuit. Right. And I found that they were doing closed sessions. They were not articulating on the record what the purpose was or what the litigation was, or they come out of closed session and say, we agree to take the advice of our attorney, and that's all they state as their decision. And then months down the road, you find out that they just settled a lawsuit for $100,000 when all they said on the record was, we're accepting the advice of our attorney. Well, that's not giving the public any idea of what your actual decision is. When you're reading the minutes and when you're even in the meeting, they just come out of a closed session and say, we're accepting our attorney's advice. Well, that doesn't tell you what decision was. Right. So that really irritated me. So that's where I got started with that.
I want to try to get up to speed as quickly as we can,
Sure.
because we had you in, when was it, February, March maybe?
I think February.
When after a lawsuit had been filed by you against the county. So briefly tell us again what that was about, and then we'll jump ahead here to the most recent activities, because there has been news this week and some depositions in the past 2 weeks, I guess, about where this thing stands currently. So,
well, in a nutshell, back in 2015, early 2015, there's some animosity, to say the least, between the sheriff and the undersheriff. So Sheriff Shandell and David Tucker were not getting along, and Tucker was investigated for potentially working another job while he was supposed to be working as an undersheriff at the sheriff's department, and that led to Tucker being placed on administrative leave while the investigation was underway. It was submitted to the special prosecutor in Leelanau County, who decided not to pursue any charges. Tucker filed a grievance regarding how his issues were addressed by the sheriff. The sheriff didn't even respond to the grievance, so Tucker appealed that grievance to the HR, Human Resource Committee of Benzie County.
Right.
And the HR committee held a secret meeting, I found out through my litigation, on August 31st of last year, where they made a decision in a closed session, which they legally made, in my opinion, and it's alleged in my lawsuit that they illegally made a decision in closed session to offer to settle the grievance with Mr. Tucker for around $10,000 for some back pay he said he was due. And that decision was never brought to the full board for their consideration. Tucker rejected that settlement offer. And then in November, Tucker's attorney sent a threat of a litigation, basically a draft complaint to the county, which was distributed to the county's insurer and different county, the sheriff and other officials. And then jump forward to December 22nd of 2015. The Board of Commissioners went into a closed session, and in the minutes and in the agenda, it indicates they went in to discuss a legal opinion of Attorney Bonnie Toski, and that's all they indicated for the permissible purpose to go into that closed session, which my lawsuit alleges that they did not actually articulate a permissible purpose and an exemption under the Open Meeting Act that allowed that, and that was an illegal meeting. And second of all, they made decisions in that closed session. They didn't come out of that closed session to make whatever decisions they made. They made them in closed session, which now through my litigation I found out the decision they made was to not go with the attorney that they were meeting with by phone in that closed session and to consult with another attorney. And they did that by consensus. They didn't make a motion in the closed session. It was a consensus that they would confer with a different attorney. But I have an email from the attorney that was meeting with them in that closed session that says that the board determined that they would consult with another attorney. And a determination and a decision, if you take out your thesaurus, they're pretty close in nature.
Well, I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds because we could go hours on this, but a couple of things that have struck me about this story is you and I have talked over the past 9-10 months or so. Just the whole notion of a closed session in general, in some ways it almost seems a little silly. And by that I mean you go into a closed session and maybe you don't vote, there's no motion, but then you come out and say, I make a motion for this, all in favor, aye, and then you're done. It almost makes the finer points irrelevant if you still don't really know what happened in that closed session. You still don't know what was discussed in that closed session. And as I said before we started recording here, the show, I just have concern generally that public bodies seem to jump to closed session far more often than maybe they need to, or they take advantage of it unnecessarily. It just seems to defeat a lot of the purpose of open government and why are we going into closed session? And you put it nicely with your response.
Yeah, I think I agree wholeheartedly. And when a public body and people get elected for public office, if the first thing that they're thinking is how can we conduct a closed session to keep this secret, that I don't understand. You think that they'd want to be transparent as possible, but that's often not the case. And in Benzie County, they're notorious for going into closed session. Even if they have a legitimate reason to go into closed session, they're not saying, okay, let's find every way possible to go into closed session. Instead, they should be saying, should we or why are we? And let's deliberate that before we even go into closed session. Is it necessary? And in this instance, they went into closed session on December 22nd, and all they state is we're going in to discuss a legal opinion of some attorney, and the public doesn't even know what the subject matter of the legal opinion is, and they're purposely not placing that on the record to keep it secret. And then subsequent to that, this is a good segue, I submit a FOIA request that is all-encompassing that states I'm requesting all public records, emails, documents pertaining to the issues that were discussed in that December 22nd, 2015 closed session. And in response to that FOIA request, they say, we had a legal opinion, that's the only public record, you can't have any of that, even if it contains factual information. And secondly, if there are any other documents that are pertaining to the issues that you discussed, that were discussed in that closed session, we can't even tell you whether they exist or whether there are any other documents that exist that are pertinent to those issues, because to do so would violate the confidentiality of the closed session. And they put that in writing, and they state that in the depositions that I took and my attorney took on August 30th. And that's just ludicrous to say. It just flies in the face of governmental transparency laws.
Well, again, I'm trying to make sense of this for everybody at home in terms of what has happened in the months since you were here last, since February. Maybe this is a good place to start with this article from June.
Sure.
The attorney for the county, if I'm correct, was claiming that the Human Resource Committee itself was not a public body, was not a governing body, therefore was not subject to the Open Meetings Act. And that was debunked pretty quickly by the judge?
Well, the judge said that their argument, valid or not, which it's not valid, in my humble opinion, that it didn't relate to the injunction that we were requesting, because my lawsuit, after I amended it, alleged that the HR committee meetings, which was a member of 3 board members, there's a total of 7 commissioners on the full board, that my allegations are that on several of those occasions, a 4th member of the board would show up to those meetings and deliberate with the committee on agenda items, and in some instances, add agenda items to the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, and then totally take over that conversation on that agenda item and deliberate with the board, not vote with them on the agenda items, but yet control the, giving affirmative and opposing views on things to sway the votes on different issues and to persuade the committee to take different actions.
And when you've added a 4th person from the full commission to that 3-member HR committee, it then becomes
a quorum of the entire full board. And they don't notice it as such. Publicly, if you're going to hold a meeting, such as if a 4th member is going to attend the committee meeting, they'd have to notice it probably as a special meeting because it's not a regular board meeting, and that was never done. And it happened continuously, so I filed a motion, it's right here, it's a motion for an injunction that was filed on June 9th, and
While you do that, I want to read from this article, because this is a quote from you in this article back in June, that we're opening this up to all kinds of other problems if we're saying that that the HR committee is not a legitimate governing body. This has implications for other committees. Why bother having the clerk take minutes? Why issue meeting notices? Why even let the public attend these meetings? I mean, 3 fantastic questions if we're saying, well, the HR committee really isn't a governing body.
Well, and the most interesting part in that, and we spoke earlier about this, is that when you put these people on the stand, like I did, not on the stand, but under oath in depositions on August 30th, and their attorneys who are advising them of that is sitting right next to them in these depositions, and they're saying, oh no, the HR committee is a public body. It follows the OMA to the best of their ability, even though they mess up quite often. We all know full well that the HR committee is a public body. We take minutes and we follow the Open Meeting Act requirements. Right. So basically they're telling their attorney sitting right next to him that he's out of his mind, which in my humble opinion, once again, he is.
Okay, so that gets us through June. What were the depositions about most recently, 2 weeks ago, August 30th of 2016? Why have those depositions?
Well, those depositions ultimately were to prove all the allegations in my lawsuit, which are several. I have 7 counts in my lawsuit. 5 of them are Open Meeting Act allegations, and 2 of them are FOIA allegations related to the sheriff and the county refusing to give me any documents pertaining to that closed session, the issues that were discussed. And the Open Meeting Act allegations of the lawsuit pertain to the HR committee meeting without notice at one instance on August 31st of last year, when they made a decision to give Tucker some payoff in a grievance settlement that he rejected. So that's one issue. And the other Open Meeting Act allegations relate to the 4th member showing up at meetings, and I'm requesting a permanent injunction prohibiting that behavior. And after I filed my injunction in June, we had a hearing on June 21st, and that's the other article here.
Yep.
That came out on the Record Patriot on July 5th. And the court granted my preliminary injunction. I think the judge says, I'm quoting here from the transcript, the June 21st transcript from Judge Thompson, and he says, when we have that 4th person, I have a real concern as to why they're there, Thompson said in the court transcript. Quote, if they simply sit and they participate and watch the proceedings of the committee, that's completely different than sharing their thoughts, their opinions, their input. And if that's the case, I think the county is treading in an area that potentially and ultimately could be found to be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So the depositions are to buttress the arguments that were articulated in my motion for an injunction and related to those counts in my lawsuit and the other counts in my lawsuit. And that's exactly what the depositions did.
And the judge did grant this injunction back in June, which means the HR committee can no longer invite or include a 4th member of
the injunction
the committee.
Basically, I'm not sure if it's quoted in here. I don't have a copy. I'm not sure if the judge.
That's the gist of it.
The gist of it, the judge in a nutshell ordered that a full board quorum cannot deliberate and participate during committee meetings, not just HR committee, any committee meetings is what the injunction that he issued says.
Tell me who all was deposed on August 30th? How many people you did because we're under deposition because you have several hours worth of material. So how many were included in that? And again, I guess maybe summarize how you felt. Did you hear what you wanted to hear?
To start out, to answer your last question, absolutely. We went in very prepared and with questions that were very well thought out. And the individuals that were deposed was the county clerk, Benzie County County Clerk Don Alney, Sheriff Ted Shendell, Commissioner Vance Bates, Commissioner Frank Walterhouse, and County Administrator Mitch Deitch, who is also the FOIA coordinator for Benzie County. And with Mitch Deitch, what I find very perplexing is he's the FOIA coordinator for Benzie County, and if he responds to everyone's FOIA requests in the same manner that he did mine, the county's going to be repeatedly sued over and over because of his ignorance of FOIA laws. Under deposition, he states that in response to my FOIA request, he had no idea and still has no idea that it is mandated that if you're withholding any public records that pertain to the request, you have to itemize those records, each one of them, to the requester, the general nature of those, and then explain to the requester and justify any exemption that applies to those documents, either wholly or in part. So he also, in addition to that, does not understand that if there's a portion of the document that has exemptable information in it, that needs to be excised and redacted from that document, and the rest of the non-exempt information has to be provided to the requester. And that's just like basic, 101 grade school knowledge of FOIA response.
Well,
and that's what it's mind-boggling that he does not get that, and he's in that position.
I think it's interesting to me that you say grade school knowledge of FOIA, because you understand, as I said at the beginning, far more about this even than I do, than many, if not most, journalists in northern Michigan, I would venture to say, just because you've put your heart into it for 15 years.
And I get that.
So, not only, I think maybe that's one reason I was going to ask you too. Maybe that's one reason why the media at large hasn't really covered a lot of this.
Well,
it's a very complex issue.
It's very boring.
It can be very boring.
Very boring.
It's really hard to narrow down into a 60-second news story for TV or radio. But there's just so much to it that keeps raising questions. I mean, time after time, every time there's a new development, every time I see some update from you on Facebook, or if there's something in the Record Patriot there in Benzie County, I mean, there's substantial news.
There is, and like we were speaking before we started filming, these depositions, they're about an hour apiece for each of these 5 individuals. And if this goes to trial, I have over, I think, 15 witnesses on my witness list. If they force us to go to trial, they're, in my opinion, begging us to settle at this point, but they're not willing to concede everything that I'm demanding. And if they don't, we're just going to go to trial. And I'm not in this to make money. This is not a money-making adventure at all. Yeah, I can get some punitive damages. They're measly, and I can get my attorneys can get paid for the time they're working on my case. There's no money in this for me with the amount of time and effort that I spend on this. And it all comes down to the fact that they're in a public position. They're governmental, either employees or elected officials. And I say it's grade school knowledge because all you have to do is read. The acts are pretty simplistic if you read it. The FOIA says if you respond, you have to provide the requester with an itemization of what you're withholding.
And why.
And why.
Yep.
And when that's not done, and the person that's been designated by the county board to handle responding to FOIA requests does not understand that, then how can he be in that position? Because he's not competent. I'm not saying he's not, that he's an idiot. I'm saying he's not competent in that area of law. So he either needs to become competent or they need to find someone else to be their FOIA coordinator.
What do you hope comes out of this ultimately? What is, I think we asked this back in February, what's the end goal? What's the timeline now for going to or avoiding a trial?
Well, there's the Board of Commissioners on Tuesday went into closed session to discuss my lawsuit.
Of this week?
Yeah, of this week.
So we're at September 12th.
Yeah, 2 days ago.
Okay.
Went into closed session. It was on the agenda, and they stated an actual permissible purpose. It was to go into closed session to discuss Van Dusen versus Benzie County and Sheriff, because open discussion could potentially have a detrimental financial effect on their litigating or settlement position, and that's a legitimate closed set, because they could be free to discuss the pros and cons of my settlement demand, which I have right here.
Tell me too. Let me look at this while you answer this question for me and for everybody. What are the permissible purposes? When is it okay to go into closed session?
Well, the permissible purposes, there's an enumerated list in the Open Meetings Act, and they range from discussing personnel issues, like a disciplinary action against a public body's employees. If the public body's employee requests a closed session, you can discuss in closed session things such as attorney-client privilege documents. If the attorney is giving you a written opinion, you can go into closed session to discuss a written opinion on a specified legal issue. You can go into closed session to discuss pending litigation against the public body if it will have a detrimental financial effect on you, an open discussion. So those are a few of them. There's other, like union negotiations can be conducted in closed session and things of that nature.
And it seems like what you're asking for in your settlement is what you've been asking for all along. You want all of the relevant documentation. You want them to admit that the Human Resource Committee is a public body. You want a copy of minutes of meetings, I guess closed session minute meetings, which may be considered unusual. And you want a copy of this letter from the attorney. I mean, those are the basics. You're not saying I demand $1 million as my settlement.
No, well, I mean, the number 2 on here is that, we're requesting them to stipulate to entering of an order that grants all the relief that's requested in my lawsuit, counts 1 through 7. And in the relief portion of those counts, it articulates what I'm demanding or what I'm requesting the judge to take action on, which is ultimately to grant me my attorney fees and costs and punitive damages for arbitrary and capricious responses to my FOIA requests. But substantially, I just want all the records, and I want the judge to declare that what they did in these different instances was unlawful, and to enjoin them from that same activity in the future. A permanent injunction, not just a temporary injunction, which I got back on June 21st.
Have you seen things change or improve since February? Since you and I sat here last time, have those closed meetings gone down in frequency? Has the need for them decreased? I mean, what has changed? Do you think they're getting the message?
I think one thing is that now there's kind of an unwritten rule that a 4th member of the full Board of Commissioners just does not go to any committee meetings. That's kind of like the unwritten rule, I guess, right now. I'm not saying they never do, but if they do go, they keep their mouth shut, I guarantee, because the clerk audio records these, These commissioners signed sworn affidavits under oath that they did not deliberate at several committee meetings where I have audio recordings that prove that they did. And I played some of those audio recordings for them, Commissioner Vance Bates specifically, in the deposition, and said, is that true, that you did not deliberate at that meeting and that meeting? And he's like, I don't recall. And we're like, your affidavit says that you didn't deliberate under oath, and now you're saying you don't recall, so which is it? And then they're like, well, we don't even understand what the term deliberate means. And, well, you signed an affidavit that says you didn't do it, so either you understood it then, you understood it then, but you don't now? What's the case? The other thing that significantly changed that is kind of irritating is I see commissioners, not so much the sheriff, but certain commissioners are angry at me. You can tell they're just furious at me. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, they should be furious at their attorneys. These attorneys are advising them, your committees aren't public bodies. That's what they're telling them, not just the HR committee, but your committees are not public bodies.
Which they argued back in June. Yeah.
That's just insane. It's insanity for them to be giving that advice. Your committees did nothing wrong when a 4th member of your board came, because all they did was make public commentary during those HR committee meetings. They were not deliberating with the board. And when the attorneys had them sign those affidavits, we asserted in the motion for an injunction that these audio recordings exist that prove that they did deliberate with the committee. And the attorneys were so lazy they didn't go back and listen to those audio recordings that Dawn Alany, their clerk, has in her possession, just like I have in my possession.
We are very short on time,
sure,
which I knew would happen. Tell us what the next court date is, and then finally, if you have a quote-unquote favorite deposition that people should listen to. Is there one part or one person that you depose that maybe someone watching now would find especially interesting, whether it's
sure,
Commissioner Bates or whomever?
Well, I would say that the next court date, on your first question, it hasn't been scheduled. We have some final settlement dates and a tentative trial date, but usually those things get moved around, so nothing's firm on that. But there'll be different motion hearings, I'm sure, prior to that. As far as depositions, all the depositions all 5 of them are streaming online right now on my YouTube page I just set up. So if you go to YouTube, you can just search Eric Van Dusen, Benzie probably, and you'll find all of them. You can just find my page from Eric Van Dusen. My favorite is Sheriff Schindel's, because regardless of whether you like him or don't like him, he was the most forthcoming and honest. I'm not saying all of them were dishonest, but he didn't really hold back. And you could tell that the attorney and him that was sitting there supposed to be representing him were not
in agreement.
Yes, I absolutely know. I know that. The sheriff would settle with me tomorrow on my allegation. I have one FOIA allegation in my lawsuit against the sheriff. And the sheriff acknowledged what he did in response to my FOIA was contrary to the mandates of the FOIA. And he acknowledges that. And he would just give me all the records that he wrongfully withheld tomorrow if his attorneys would just settle with me just for him to get him dismissed from the lawsuit. So he's probably the most enjoyable to watch just because it's very informative as to what lengths not only did the commissioners and committees go to keep things secret from the public, but even him. The August 31st, 2015 HR committee meeting on the grievance by David Tucker that was held, the sheriff was never informed about that. There was no public notice of that meeting, and they did that purposely. They held that secret meeting in closed session. They immediately went into closed session, never had an open session, and he was kept in the dark about all that process.
Well, Eric, I appreciate you coming in. We do have to wrap it up here. Our half hour is up, but Eric Van Dusen has been our guest, and we'll continue to follow this pretty fantastic and interesting stuff as it relates not only to the public interest, Open Meetings Act, freedom of information, but journalism as well, and how we can all kind of do better to pay attention to that, to this kind of thing. I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. That's Eric Van Dusen, and I'm Bill Freilich, and we will see you next time on The Briefing.